Hello friends, my name is Jannette, and recently Goodreads put out a list of the 40 most read books of the 2023 Goodreads reading challenge. As soon as I saw that there was a list, I was like, that would make a really cool like reading challenge or video or something along those lines. But then I took a look at the actual list and I was like, oh. But I had read a bunch of them already. It's been a little bit since they put out the list, but I'm still thinking about this like video and project. So I figured I would start it. I will make no commitments. We will see how far we get. So as I looked at the list, I had two main like objections. One is that it has a bunch of Colleen Hoover on this. And number two is that it has Sarah J. Maas on here as well. So here's what I came up for myself. I'm going to try anytime I come across Colleen Hoover, but really that's more an exercise in seeing how far I can get before I DNF. I'm not committing to finishing any Colleen Hoover. I feel like I have a good grasp on what she does and why it is incredibly not for me. So I will try the books that are on here, see how far I get, and let you guys know what my DNF breaking point was. And for the Sarah J. Maas ones that I haven't read yet, I'm not going to read for this project because I am reading them for my Patreon. So I'm doing chapter by chapter recaps of A Court of Thorns and Roses right now. I'm about halfway through the first book, but the intention is to continue on with the series in that format, so I won't be reading and reviewing them for here. Let's take a look at the first five. Number one is It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. Number two is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Number three is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Number four is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. And number five is It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I've read Daisy Jones, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, and It Ends With Us. I have not read It Starts With Us or I'm Glad My Mom Died. So I'm gonna go try It Starts With Us, and then I will talk about It Ends With Us and It Starts With Us together. Wish me luck. I finished It Starts With Us, and I'm having a little bit of a moment here with it because I finished it, right? So it really isn't as bad as the two other Colleen Hoovers that I've read, which are Slammed and It Ends With Us. So I feel like I'm grading this book on a curve. So let's back up here and talk about number one and number five on this list, It Ends With Us and It Starts With Us. It Ends With Us is an adult contemporary about a woman named Lily Bloom. At the very beginning of the story, her father has just passed away, and her father was abusive to her mother throughout her life. On the day of the funeral, she ends up meeting a man, and there is instant attraction there, but he is only interested in something casual, and she doesn't do casual sex. She is only interested in a relationship. So it seems like they are incompatible, but they keep crossing paths. They eventually get married, and the story is about that abusive relationship between Lily and her husband, Ryle. At the same time, we're getting flashbacks to Lily's first love, Atlas, when she was in high school, and Atlas ends up showing back in her life. Now the plot of It Starts With Us is a little bit of a spoiler, so I'll mark it here for spoilers if you want to skip ahead. But at the end of It Ends With Us, Lily ends up hospitalized after Ryle's physical abuse, and that is the last straw, especially as she finds out that she is pregnant. So that relationship ends, and that's kind of the end of it. But we're left with the piece of Lily and Atlas hanging open. So It Starts With Us is like the continuation of the story. Months later, Lily and Atlas once again running into each other and trying to figure out if they can have a relationship, especially as Ryle is still around. He has some visitation rights with his daughter with Lily. So it's the exploration of this new romantic relationship. I have a full review of It Ends With Us here on my channel, and I really deeply disliked that book. This was only the second Colleen Hoover book I ever read, and I really hated Slammed as well. And Slammed has a problematic relationship at the heart of it. Like, it has other problems with it in terms of the writing and the simplicity and how immature and juvenile the entire thing is. But at the end of the day, it is a teacher-student relationship. Even though she is of age, she is 18, the way that the teacher acts is absolutely an abuse of power throughout that entire story. And he's also incredibly manipulative, and the entire thing is just steeped in all of this like trauma for the sake of trauma. And so here I come into It Ends With Us only to see all of that repeated. I think the problem with It Ends With Us is that it glorifies and romanticizes certain aspects of abuse. Now, I don't think that you walk away from that book thinking that what Ryle ultimately did to Lily is okay or it was right. But I think it is, one, incredibly misleading to call this a romance because the central relationship at the heart of that book is an abusive one. And two, in in order to treat the domestic violence as a plot twist or as something that we are like building towards from like a story structure way, we get all of this romanticizing of their relationship early on. And it is behavior that is 100% part of that manipulation and abuse. It isn't that from one night to the next, Ryle becomes this way. We see signs from the moment that she meets him and he's throwing a tantrum and throwing like chairs around on a roof that this man has anger issues and that he's also incredibly manipulative. Everything that he does in order to get into a relationship with Lily is manipulation, but none of that stuff is really contended with, right? We sit with that as the good parts of the relationship. We romanticize the early part of their relationship, and I think it is incredibly manipulative of Colleen Hoover to market this, of her publisher to market this as a romance, because there is like some other guy like hanging out in the wings, and one that she doesn't even end up with. And I know lots of fans will say, well, I knew it was wrong, and you know, we're in Lily's point of view and that's how she viewed the relationship. The problem is that all of that remains unchallenged in Lily's point of view, and I have seen enough of Colleen Hoover's fandom and the way that they talk about Ryle specifically and the way that they continue to romanticize him even after the end of the book. That brings us to It Starts With Us, and what it really felt like to me was two things. One, a cash grab, and two, Colleen Hoover listened to every single criticism that people had of It Ends With Us and is using this book to address them. This feels like a truer romance. It has a happily ever after. It really sits more with Lily thinking about what it would mean to expose her daughter to an abuser. However, we still have so much of Lily thinking about the good parts of her relationship with Ryle. And so we never get around to the thing that I had the biggest issue with in It Ends With Us, and that is any sort of challenge or any sort of recognition of the way that Ryle was always manipulative and always abusive. I just also feel icky about the way that Ryle's like family and friends engage with this entire situation. They are supportive of Lily, and there is like an amount that this book recognizes and is exploring how domestic violence is bad. But there is also a way that as the friends and family, they continue to excuse Ryle in a way, or the language that they use is all so pacifying and so minimizing of what Lily went through, and it bothers me, and it continued to bother me even as we are seeing these surface level shows of support. There's this underlying, just, I don't know, like I said, ickiness about the way that they keep pulling Ryle into Lily's orbit. Apart from like the problematic elements of this, I have an issue with Colleen Hoover's storytelling style as well. There is something like sensationalized about the way that she approaches plot. It really feels like very soap opera-y to me. Instead of plot beats and plot progressions, she just throws these like trauma twists in. Like every time you would think maybe the plot will turn left, she just actually goes, and a secret baby, and an abusive family member, and a drug addiction. And it's just like, well, girl, where are we going with all of this? That's like true generally about what I've seen of her style, and that is absolutely true and It Ends With Us, and a little less true but still kind of true and It Starts With Us. I also really don't like her writing style, but I see why it is incredibly accessible. It is very, very simple. She tends towards short sentences, and she writes in an incredibly linear style, because it's like, I did this and then I did this and then I did this and I went outside and did this and then I did this, and oh my god, it just is so little variation, and it's so like repetitive. It really just wrings every piece of action out of a scene. The entire thing feels like Lily having the same 2 or 3 thoughts and emotions over and over and over again. I don't like Colleen Hoover's writing style. I don't like her plots. I find her characters to act and feel much younger than they actually are. I don't like the way that she markets her books. I don't like the way that she positions them. Every single one of them, all 3 of them so far that I've read, have some problematic aspect. I would love for people to just let Colleen go. Okay, so next I have to read I'm Glad My Mom Died. It's a very short audiobook, so I think I'm going to try and do that first, and then I'm sitting with this decision of whether or not I will reread Evelyn Hugo. I finished reading I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. I had listened to the audiobook. I had a copy of the audiobook from Libro FM from their ALC program. It was perfect because I had some cleaning up to do around here. I didn't really even finish, but you know, we did plenty. plenty enough. When I had finished picking up in the living room, I was almost near the end of the audiobook. I still had a little bit to go. So I just sat down at my desk to play The Sims and finish listening to the rest. And there's a specific moment where McCurdy's voice breaks as she is narrating, reading her story. And, you know, I was just sitting here crying a little bit. I was a little bit hesitant to go into this memoir because I had heard so many good things, and I also didn't really have a connection to Jennette McCurdy. I'm a little bit too old to be in like the iCarly era, but I'm glad that I finally did because I do really think that McCurdy created something here that is incredibly emotionally impactful. I was really surprised by how she built this memoir with some really simple language. There's a way that she puts us, the reader, in her story, but she doesn't over-explain things. She just presents them in such a matter-of-fact way, and that simplicity in her language helps her to capture almost the naivety that goes along with the story that she's telling. You're really being placed in her point of view, and it is so vulnerable, and I love that that also makes the reader like come to their own conclusions, right? Because she doesn't say this thing happened to me and it was terrible, right? She just kind of presents the events. It's up to us, the reader, to go, oh my God, that was terrible. I will say that sometimes that language did become a little bit too monotonous, and I think you can even tell in the audiobook performance. It wasn't anything that like ruins the book or anything like that. It's literally like half a star's worth of wishing that this was maybe filled out in just a few places to like differentiate a little bit. And I'm curious to see if McCurdy keeps writing what she comes out with next. After finishing that book, I felt like I needed a little bit of a palate cleanser. So Charlie and I went on a long walk, and while I was downstairs, I saw that I had some book mail. Hey, these vlogs that I do, where it's just like me reading and reacting, are only kind of vlogs, but they're vlog enough, right? That if I get book mail while doing one of these, I have to show you. So I know what both of these are. I'm very excited for both of them. So the first is An Arc of the Odds by Lindsay Puckett. I met Lindsay at BookNet Fest a couple of years ago. She's an author tuber here and she writes middle grade. This is her second book. Lindsay reached out to me and she asked if I wanted a copy, and I said absolutely. So thank you, Lindsay, and thank you, Scholastic, for sending this arc my way. The second thing I got are my books of the month, and yes, I said books. I've actually been skipping the last several months, but this month had two of my most anticipated releases of this year. First up is Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo. I've really enjoyed Acevedo's YA. Whenever I talk about it, I always talk about how much those books would have meant to me had I read them as a young adult, and even so, I still fully appreciate them. So I am so excited to read her adult book. I'm also very curious because there's already been some mixed reviews, and even the people who are talking about it positively are almost approaching, like I've heard a few reviews that are approaching their positive reviews in an almost defensive manner of like, let me tell you why this is good actually. So I'm very curious like what's going on here for people to like finish this and be like, hold on, let me defend this book. I have a feeling I'm going to enjoy the writing style no matter what, because I really do enjoy Acevedo's style. So I'm curious to see what I find in here plot and character wise. And second is Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. I liked her first book, The Hacienda, and I really love vampire stories. You guys know I love vampire stories, but also I'm incredibly hard on them because I think they're difficult to get right. And I love the lane that Cañas is writing in. It reminds me of like Sylvia Moreno Garcia and Cali Fajardo Einstein. Any book that is a Black or Latina author sort of breathing new life into a well-loved or well-worn sort of trope or category, I'm just going to be like, yep, give it to me. So this idea of like a border town and like vampires on one side and colonization on the other just really spoke to me. And in fact, I decided to start a book club. I used to work with Chirp to do that book club, but I'm no longer doing that. So I've felt like the emptiness of being able to host a book club with like a larger audience. So I started a book club on Fable, and it's called Reading Into It, and it's going to be picking new and popular work and doing like deep dives into them. And our first book is Vampires of El Norte. The book club itself officially starts on the 15th when this is released, but I've got my copy from Book of the Month a little bit early, which is good because it means that I can start reading slowly and like contributing to the chat sort of ahead of the time. So I'll put the link to the Fable book club in the description. And yeah, we love a little bit of book blackmail after some emotional devastation. I had thought about rereading The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, as I mentioned. I think I still might try. I think tonight when I get into bed, I will see how much of this I get through, but I will save talking about this and Daisy Jones and the Six for tomorrow, and that will wrap up the first 5 on this top 40. I'm glad that I went back to this because it put some things into focus for me. Namely, I think the very end of Daisy Jones really soured me on the experience in a way that I only sort of clocked when I immediately finished reading it, but with time and the more that I talk about the pros and cons of this book, the more those feelings have grown and have colored this entire experience. That, coupled with the fact that each book by Taylor Jenkins Reid that I've read, I've liked a little bit less, and that coupled with the understandable and predictable surge of negativity that you get whenever an author hits it this big, all of that has really colored my impression of Taylor Jenkins Reid. Especially because I read Seven Husbands very quickly. I did not do a review at all when I finished, and I feel like I missed a lot. I forgot a lot, but as I've seen people engage with this more critically, I was like, huh, that just all sailed over my head. So I think it was good for me to go back to Seven Husbands. In this book, our primary character, Evelyn Hugo, is an incredibly famous actress, and she reaches out to an unknown journalist in order to tell her life story. And when this journalist is like, why me? Evelyn is very cagey about it and is just basically listen to my life story. And when we get to the end, there is a sort of twist that puts it all together. Evelyn is Cuban American and the journalist Monique is biracial. And so I think primarily what I missed the first time around that has been put more in focus for me because of my experience with Carrie Soto, and how in Carrie Soto I was really unimpressed with how Taylor Jenkins Reid approached writing a Latina character. So coming back here, I was like, aha, pattern established. I think that Taylor Jenkins Reid is not writing sort of these in your face and overtly racist things, but I think that she continues to write women of color in a really empty manner. Honestly, coming back here, I see why so much of this sailed right over my head, because the same thing happened in Carrie Soto, where we establish these women and their identity sort of very early on, and there's some lip service paid about the way that they move through the world. That is generally forgotten in the second half of the book, and that identity doesn't feel like something they carry with them, but something that is occasionally brought up, and again with a line of oh, because she was Cuban, she felt this way, and I was like, oh yeah. I forgot about that. Honestly, I think it's more uncomfortable the way that Monique is portrayed and this emphasis that she has on being biracial and not black. I think that I have as someone who is biracial myself, I really didn't appreciate the way that was explored, and I know that a lot of that sentiment can come from internalized anti-blackness, and that's not what Reid is exploring, and that's not what she has the depth to explore. So it's just thrown in here in a way that feels incredibly empty. This is going to be as vague as I can make it, but it's going to reference what happens at the end of this. So you are one of the 10 people in the world who hasn't read this yet and you want to avoid spoilers, everything is marked in the description. By the time we get to the end and we figure out what all of the connections are, I couldn't help but feel that Monique was black in this weird sort of color coding thing, that it was a foreshadowing thing for us to know Monique was black all along, in the same way that all of the Baratheons were blonde. And it was oh my God, they were blind all along. That was the feeling that this gave me. It's interesting because I recently posted on my TikTok a little jokey list of characters I think belong in jail, non-villain characters that should go straight to jail. And I put the cast of Daisy Jones in there for reasons we will get to. But so many people responded and were Evelyn Hugo, Evelyn Hugo. And I was why? That's how much I forgot about this book. I was why Evelyn, I wonder? And then we get to the end again and we see the thing that happens that sets this entire finding Monique and telling her the story in motion, and it's really messed up. It's really messed up, man. And she's confessing, I get it, but also there's a way that it's complicated, and I understand why Evelyn did what she did, and it's messed up still, but there is a way that this man is treated, this black man is treated, and it's almost like discarded by the story, that added to the general feelings of discomfort that I had on reread. I do think that there are some things that TJR does well. I think that there is a way that she builds like historical and contemporary worlds in a very simplistic style. It's almost like an overload of like details and information in very simple language that builds these characters and these circumstances to a place where you're like, this almost feels like it could be a real person. Now, you could also attribute that to the fact that these books are all very clearly like mirrored after real people. So, you know, that's kind of a shortcut, but like it is effective. I do see why this has hype. I do see why this story engrosses people. I don't think it's the best thing ever written. I do think that there are some elements that I would personally consider like problematic. I don't think it's the worst thing ever written, and after rereading I would adjust my rating down like a full star because of those elements that I think were a little empty and a little mistreated. And that brings us to Daisy Jones and the Six. Now, we have a whole Snark Squad pod episode dedicated to this with Kat from Catty-tastic and our friend Devin Hinchy. I re-listened to it to like refresh my memory again on what I thought about this, and it's a really good episode. It's very interesting to hear all of our initial impressions. I enjoyed this when I read it. The beginning is a little bit slower and a little bit more difficult to get into. There is a way that you're getting used to all of these characters and falling into the rhythm of the structure of this, which is interview based, and the interview based structure really gives you some things that are very neat about this, including like limited points of view, unreliable narration, and all of this commentary about like memory and the ways that people remember different things happening different ways. Like all of that was really neat, but it also limits you to certain interactions, and there were ways that we all wanted to see more, especially of like dialogue and interactions between the characters and things like that. Daisy feels like a complete character, and Reid is really smart about the way that she sets up Daisy's foils in order to achieve that. So there are several other female characters that come in, and in being a contrast for Daisy, do a lot of character work for Daisy as well. As I've alluded to, the thing that gets me about this book every time is the ending. There's another sort of twist or reveal at the end of this, and it is one that I think just doesn't add a ton to the story, because it really changes the framing of the story, and it adds all of this like backwards context to what these people are saying, who they're saying it to, their motivations, and it isn't something that is like completely out of line with like some of the thematic content here, especially in terms of like unreliable narration and whatnot, but it made me so uncomfortable, especially because it was completely not needed, and it was like information dangled over the reader, a question being answered that like nobody asked. It didn't need to be revealed the way it was and when it was. It just felt like a cheap trick in a story that otherwise really didn't need it. I also don't truly love like the open-endedness of this ending and what it implies, because of the way that I felt about the characters, because of the way that I felt about Billy and Daisy. Like the ending of this in particular was kind of like hard pass. But this is one that, again, I do understand the hype. I think it is very readable. I think it's an interesting topic. I think that it is something that people can invest feelings into. The format makes it relatively easy to read. I've always said that Evelyn Hugo was my favorite, and then Daisy Jones, and then Malibu Rising, and then Carrie Soto. But now, like after having freshly reread Evelyn Hugo, I'm not too sure, like between these two. I haven't reread Daisy Jones. I just kind of revisited my feelings. So maybe it's because Evelyn is fresher in my head that I'm inclined to do Daisy Evelyn instead, but you know, don't take my word for it. So those were the first 5. To quickly recap and give some final ratings here, number 1 was It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover, and I would ultimately give that a 1.5 out of 5 stars, and I definitely don't think it's worth your time. Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid is a 3 out of 5 stars for me, and it is not one that I would discourage people from reading, and it is actually one that I would recommend to get people back into reading, or for like your casual reader friends or like non-reader friends. I think there is something there that has a lot of mass appeal. And the same goes for number 3, The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which I also gave 3 out of 5 stars to. I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy is an impactful memoir, and not one where you need to be super close to the celebrity at the heart of it to understand and to relate to. This is one where I would say that if you can deal with the content, and please do check out content warnings, which I always include in the description, and even if you're somebody who's sort of only casually interested in memoirs or nonfiction, this is a good one to incorporate into your reading because it is very accessible and because it is incredibly emotional. And finally, It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover is a 1 out of 5 stars. To me, it was very poorly written, an overstuffed plot with characters that really didn't come to life, and ultimately I think it glorifies and romanticizes an abusive relationship. I would not waste your time. I'm going to try to maybe keep track of like how I would describe like the different things that are on here. So 4 of these I would describe as simply written books with like a bit of a twisty nature to them, and 1 is a celebrity memoir. So we'll see what further entries on this list look like. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, I'd love to chat with you down in the comments. No promises on like if we'll get to 6 to 10 timeline and all of that. I'm feeling good about at least doing numbers 6 through 10 because I've read a good number of them, but we'll see. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. These are some non-villain characters that I think should go straight to jail. Some of this is based on vibes. Some of these people committed actual crimes. But you know, I really just looked inside my heart and asked myself, who should be in jail right now? And this is the list I came up with. First is everyone in Daisy Jones and the Six. Everyone involved in setting up those interviews, I think, should be in jail, especially when you get to the end and you find out what the twist is. When it was just like a VH1 behind the music, I was cool. When you figure out the twist, I was like, who did this? Who set this up? Why would these people say these things to that person? And why would this person ask? Straight to jail. All of the white people in Such a Fun Age. I absolutely get that the whole thing about this book is like the casual, everyday racism of woke white people. And like the whole thing is that they just get to keep living their lives. But I would love it if those people went to jail. Primarily because they are all one hot second away from a hate crime. Harry Dresden from the Dresden Files. Yes, the main character of that series. Some might say like the morally gray main character. I don't know. I only read the first book because I think that he should be the incarcerated main character of that series. There's a scene in the first book where he and his like magical sidekick are cooking up magical roofies. I'm sorry, a love potion, but the ingredients are like vodka to lower her inhibitions. Ha ha ha, jail. Ooh, sorry, Gale from the Hunger Games. I know everybody did murder and war crimes in that series, but I personally hated his war crimes like the most of the non-villain characters. And then he had the gall on top of all of that to be all like friend-zoney. No. No one can convince me that Christian Grey isn't a murderer and that the Red Room is actually just like full of the bones of the women that he has killed, like in the walls. And to be clear, this isn't kink shaming. This is based on him being an abuser and a stalker, and like he gives those vibes. He gives the very much, it started with the Neighborhood Cats vibes. It's very much giving, there will be a documentary and everybody will say how handsome and charming he was on the documentary. But everything about this man, the abuse, the dubious consent, and the way that he interacted with any woman ever, that man is a serial killer.